recording there. Stephen, do you want to start or I can start? It's up to you.
I'll go ahead and start.
Okay.
Let me see here. Can y'all see that?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. And we're good to go? Like, already recording?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So this is Freedman's deterrence. The one-sentence summary is that he's arguing for a norms-based deterrence. It's important because it explains why deterrence, the book is important because it explained the decline of deterrence. But his overall proposal is problematic in as much that he's the very basis of his argument seems to justify preemptive war against nations to change them into democracies in order to have norms-based deterrence. So then it made another note that it seems to flaw the book's thesis that in order to get to norms-based deterrence, you'd have to engage in preemption and prevention, which is the very thing that he's trying to get away from by establishing deterrence. For a paradigm, I don't think he neatly fits into one specifically, but the norms-based approach and the emphasis on that throughout the book, geez, like the whole building just shook. It seems English school-esque and almost constructivist-esque. And there's an implicit argument in norms-based approaches that it works best. I'm kind of repeating myself here. It works best when norms-based approaches work best when all the nations in the community share the same norms, which is very democratic peace theory-esque. So moving on to the thesis, Freedman thinks that we need to revitalize deterrence in the post-Cold War international relations field, but believes that it has to be done from norms, not interest. So in that vein, broad questions. He's arguing that deterrence has to be brought back from post-Cold War decline and aims to show that it's a worthwhile topic of study and viable policy. And then in particular, why did deterrence get a bad rap after the Cold War, particularly since it worked so well from 45-91, so during the Cold War. In a more in-depth summary, so deterrence was thought to be obsolete after the Cold War because the nation's enemies were non-state actors or rogue states, and neither of these were thought to respond to deterrence because with non-state actors, you can't retaliate against them because they don't have their own territory. And then with rogue states, they're already not acting rational. So it would seem that trying to deter them would not work because you assume that deterrence would be moot in that case. These two lines of thought were kind of in vogue during the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2002 and 2003, particularly in justifying the hypothetical that Saddam Hussein would give weapons of mass destruction to Al-Qaeda, which, according to the rogue/non-state actor logic, made preemption the only option. And then Freedman is against this. He's saying that we should complement Cold War era interest-based deterrence, that is the capability to destroy adversaries' stuff, with norms-based deterrence, which he says is establishing predictable patterns of behavior which demarcate what is acceptable and what isn't. And then according to his approach, the communication of limits is most easily achieved to the degree that nations possess the same normative language, which minimizes miscommunication and normalizes behavior. So I haven't looked at this one since I completed it in a week, but I gave myself kind of a 7 overall because he's got an article version of this, which is in the folder, which I think is more concise, and you can kind of get the gist of what he's saying. Yeah, and then I'll move on to special providence here. So this one
we can real quick, Stephen, Shane, do you have any questions? We can take a pause for questions after each one.
Sure.
Well, sure. Yeah, I guess. I mean, is he aiming more to just sort of say what is true in international relations simply, or is he concerned with actually providing a sort of useful pathway forward for these non-state actors and rogue states? Because it seems like he doesn't really in that, and I think you pointed this out, like even that final, like, on the contrary, you know, we need to combine this norms-based approach with this, like, how does that attend, I guess, to these to those, maybe I missed it, but in terms of how he actually overcomes those criticisms of, like, rogue states being non-rational and non-state actors not having territory?
In my reading, I didn't really see an effective response. That was something that came up in I think the 2 or 3 reviews that I read. That was the critique that they gave. But I found the argument that he's positing. I think that he might be onto something with, you know, the idea that we shouldn't just completely abandon deterrence wholesale. But I do think that this norms-based approach does have a problem because it gets back to, you know, if you want to emphasize a norms-based approach to international relations, it works when all the actors in the system have the same norms. But then that begs the question, what does it take to get all the nations to have the same norms? Is the cure worse than the disease? And I think that's a flaw in the argument that I don't see that he really has. I don't think he has an adequate answer to that.
No, that makes sense. Okay.
So, Stephen, did you buy anything about his argument?
As far as buying it, I mean, there might be there might be some validity to the idea that we shouldn't abandon deterrence wholesale. And I don't know if I would buy, this is mainly just me thinking, I don't know if I buy entirely the idea that non-state actors and rogue states have that they won't act rationally in all cases. I think that might be a bit assumed, because I think at bottom, like, anybody has, there's not anybody out there really that has absolutely nothing to lose. I think there might be there are exceptions to that, but I think that he might overemphasize the lack of rationality. So
I would agree with that, and I think, I mean, you guys are probably already aware of this, but I have to just say, by thinking out loud, that these conversations are helpful. Like what you just said there in terms of, I'm just thinking right now, that's going to be the that's going to be the rub when we're answering those comps questions. You know what I mean? So it doesn't seem. I mean, are you generally opposed to deterrence as a concept?
No,
because it would seem like we could. I would think we could and should do a better job of, like, deterring Iran, for instance, which is a rogue state.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing I guess that's interesting here, I like how you brought out, if I could just spitball on the broader field, and you guys can tell me if this is right or not, or if you agree, but, like, when we're reading this and we see things like deterrence, we tend to associate that with the school of realism. And then we see these arguments about norms. So you had said, like, you know, we get some elements of maybe what we might say is democratic peace theory, or we get some elements of what we might say is constructivism. And the reason I guess that seems kind of at odds is probably because these groups have distilled into more, like, I don't know, like
quasi-ideological.
Yeah, and they kind of become more pointed and, like, caricatures of themselves. Whereas, like, as I'm hearing about this, I'm wondering, like, how different is this from Aron, who is a classical realist and makes this distinction between heterogeneous and homogeneous systems, you know? Whereas, like, we don't take the world as a system, but we have these different systems. And, like, Europe, you might see different, like, diplomacy might work better given that there's shared norms and stuff, but it's ultimately still grounded in a sort of realist outlook. And I wonder if this is kind of trying to come back to that. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely think that you're onto something with, we shouldn't necessarily try to draw, like, hard distinctions. Like, I think you say, like, with, like the interest-based international politics, if you were to just, like, look at continental Europe as a system, its norms permeate it, I think. But, like, it would be inaccurate and maybe an overgeneralization to try to draw hard lines in, like, an ideological sense between the paradigms there.
And I like your skepticism, or I guess your curiosity as to what does it take to get those norms? Because if I'm remembering Aron correctly, I don't know, or if this is just kind of thoughts sloshing around in my head, but like if you think of Europe, like it's something that comes out of Christendom and Rome, and it's a very arduous habitual process. So yeah, that's all I have. But I think this is helpful.
Yeah. Does he come up with any way that or any theory of how these norms develop, or any and on top of it, I guess in addition, does he come up with any sort of best type of norm, like one that should be achieved?
To be honest, he might have. I'll have to go back and look more.
No, it's fine.
Okay.
It's fine.
Well, but that's a good question to bring up for us generally, I think, in terms of as we're going back to it.
Yeah.
Like he speaks about these norms in particulars, or like lays them out.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, I'll go back and look more. So I haven't touched this one since week before last, I guess.
That'll be my Fearon one too, so don't worry about it.
All right. So am I good to move on to special providence?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think unless you've got anything else, Shane, I'm good.
Yeah, I'm good.
Cool. Okay. All right. So this one, give it a kind of one sentence summary that American foreign policy is not. You can't really measure it well by traditional or continental measures of realist IR, but rather that it's divided into four camps for him. So you've got the Hamiltonians, who are the conservative internationalists, the Wilsonians, who are the liberal internationalists, the Jeffersonians, who are the liberal nationalists, and the Jacksonians, who are the conservative nationalists. So that's way oversimplified, but that's essentially the impression I got. So paradigm, Mead doesn't really map onto, I think, the paradigms in the traditional sense, but he's kind of just almost offering an alternative, uniquely American framework that's rooted in the founding and early American figures with Jackson, I guess. So the thesis, he's contending that U.S. foreign policy has been guided from the start by these four schools, and then the particular influence of how strong one school is on foreign policy ebbs and flows with time, with the one that is judged most effective to the given moment winning out. Sort of broader questions of what he's trying to get at is he's trying to lay out a true history of American foreign policy and then frames his prescriptions for America today within it. And given that much of the foreign policy scholarship is preoccupied to recall the earlier, more American ideas, and that's where he gets his four schools from. And then he wants to sort of maybe explains the best way to put it. If you look at it from a continental European perspective, it looks incoherent, but he's saying actually, if you look at it through my framework, it's not incoherent. And he sort of gets at America over time. It starts out as an insecure power on the world stage. This is Washington's farewell address. Let's not get involved in the great power politics of Europe. And then it gradually is able to increase its own power and become a player in the British world order. And then later, after World War II, during the Cold War, it assumes the mantle of the superpower and is setting its own American world order. In-depth summary. So American foreign policy has been Europeanized because of the Cold War. And Mead said that this is short-sighted because it ignores the four schools and it ignores America's own foreign policy history. So then I'll kind of get into the four schools. Hamiltonians blend global trade concerns with military strength and national security. So they're pro-free trade, pro-big business. Particular big business is an engine of peace. So this is the Hamiltonian vision of America as a mercantile republic that can defend itself with a strong military if needed, has a pessimistic view of human nature and an optimistic view of commerce. So and because of the commerce emphasis, it has a heavy emphasis on freedom for the seas and a strong navy, not a string navy.
String navy.
So second school is the Wilsonians. So this is, you might expect, emphasizes institutions and the spreading of democracy abroad, values morality and human rights over more traditionally realist concerns such as relative power and strategic or national interest. It views other parts of the world as missionary territory for democracy. And there's lots of, Mead talks about explicitly Christian elements of missionary work as well. So he's talking about like actual missionaries going into other parts of the world and sort of bringing the democratic system with them. And he says that evangelizing the world abroad revitalizes democracy at home. Out of all the schools, this is the most idealistic. So this is sort of the root of the origins of the phrase, making the world safe for democracy. It's very Wilsonian. And that has its roots as an idea from this school. And then your Jeffersonians, that's the restrainers and the origins of the myth of isolationism. They seek to limit interventions abroad and is rooted in the foreign policy of John Quincy Adams. Values foreign policy as an instrument for protecting democracy at home over and against promoting it abroad. So it's actually like a exact opposite of Wilson. So rather than democracy abroad, revitalizing it at home, it's exactly the opposite. So he says, actually, if we intervene abroad, it'll corrupt democracy at home. Generally against lose my place. So it's Jeffersonianism is skeptical of cosmopolitanism and of and it's again skeptical of Wilson because he says that Jeffersonian would worry that intervention abroad would lead to neglect of domestic affairs. So this is a pessimistic view of commerce and an optimistic view of human nature. So kind of in parentheses there, I put like sort of the Jeffersonian theme of the nation of farmers. That's my own thought in there. And then the last school is the Jacksonians, which is the most populous. Mead describes this as less of a coherent idea and more of an emotion in the American spirit. And this school emphasizes democracy as a bottom-up affair and not a top-down affair, as with the Jeffersonians. This one is the root of the idea of like cowboy diplomacy, generally against intervention. But once it does get involved, it fights unreservedly. So like the response after Pearl Harbor, for example, would kind of awaken this sort of Jacksonian-esque spirit. Where's it at here? Fights unreservedly once attacked until total victory is achieved. It's also less insular than Jefferson, as it does concern itself with interests abroad, but not to the extent of the Hamiltonians or the Wilsonians. It's rooted in a rough-cut Scotch-Irish folksy mores. He particularly brings out like Scotch-Irish in the work. Concerns with honor and treating people with respect, honor your elders, that kind of thing is Jacksonian. And then he notes that no one school has had like a lasting dominance in foreign policy. Looks inconsistent on the outside, like I said, but if you're trying to judge it by continental realism, it'll look incoherent. But he says that rather, if you look at American history through his framework, you can see that the contestation between the four schools actually benefits American decision-making or foreign policy decision-making because it allows for the best school that suits the moment to prevail. So it's kind of like foreign policy decision makers have more choices and can hence make better choices because of this increase of options, even though it might look incoherent from the European perspective. So that is the sort of the two things you need to know, I think, are what the camps are and then how their interaction benefits decision making.
If I remember correctly, Dr. Clinton's class was essentially just these theories spelled out, right? His American foreign policy class.
I wouldn't know. I didn't take that class.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
I didn't take it, but I know he loves this book and Walter Russell Mead, so that would make sense.
Yeah. So if I remember correctly, he did classify. We went through each of these sort of camps and talked about how they were, like who influenced them and how. What do y'all think of the four camps?
I'm a big fan of the book. Yeah, I think one thing, if I recall, it's been a while since I read this book, but I guess just a couple things that came to mind. I think when he does the Jeffersonian, he uses the quote from John Quincy Adams that's very popular, to not go abroad in search of monsters to destroy.
Yeah.
And I just say that as it's a helpful shorthand or something that can kind of be recreated in a Comp's answer if need be. I think I would have to double check this, but if I recall, he does in the Jacksonian camp make a big deal out of I think he calls it something like the engine of foreign policy, and because he makes such a big deal about this Scotch-Irish thing, it tends to correspond to our fighting men. And so he makes a point about basically American foreign policy ventures tend to live or die by whether the Jacksonian camp is on board. So like if you look at like Pearl Harbor is a good example, but also like you have the Jacksonians on board with like 9/11, let's say, you know, and as you lose them, it kind of the wheels come off. So that's another thing. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I like it a lot. And I know it might just be interesting. You did get at this, and I can't recall if I heard him give a talk on this one time, and I don't recall if this was like in the Q&A or if he says this in the book. He might not say it in the book, but he said explicitly that he credited his, when he's saying like normal IR theories don't fit into this, he credited his like clarity of thinking with this book by the fact that he did not study IR formally. So it's a weird thing that kind of sits outside. And he has an endowed professorship at Bard, and he has his highest degree as a Bachelor of English. It's quite wild. Wow. So, in any case,
why are we here?
But he, I just like, and I think this is part of you said all the things that this corresponds to, but the metaphor he uses when he says like, we tend to think of IR as like the man in the tower strategizing, the Bismarck or the Metternich or something, and he says that American foreign policy is like a raft where it's like, it's like it's always partially underwater and it's got holes in it, and you can't really direct it that well, but it doesn't tend to sink. It has a unique ability to stay afloat. So that's I think that's another helpful metaphor he has in terms of the overarching thing. But I think this is great in terms of from what I remember. Yeah.
Which ones do you place yourselves in?
I mean, it's tough. I think there might be, I don't know, maybe I'm influenced by all the separation of functions that I've been reading lately for the Constitution comps, but I actually I think I thrive in the fact that there's no settlement theory in Mead, to speak in functions terms, like how the needs of the moment can allow for the one that has the best solution to prevail.
I find myself probably most hostile to the Wilsonian camp.
Yeah.
And somewhat hostile. The Jeffersonian one is difficult for me because on one hand, and that's a big part of this book too, is just him attacking the myth of isolationism and showing, I don't know how relevant that will be on IR comps, but just that there never really has been American isolationism. But, I don't like that, but I do share some of these sentiments that, regime change abroad and intervention abroad tends to hurt democracy at home. I would probably say in my heart I'm a Jacksonian, but I have some Hamiltonian tendencies. And that's an interesting question too, as we look at this and seeing which of these are kind of most compatible with one another, And it seems like I would say the Wilsonians and the Hamiltonians tend to have some compatibility, but also the Jacksonians, there's ways in which they can be compatible both with the Hamiltonians and the Jeffersonians. Yeah. Because you can end up acting for commercial, and but there's a big tension there between the Hamiltonian and the Jacksonian when it's not clearly in your security interests, I guess.
Yeah. No, it reminds me a lot of a little bit of the studying that I've been doing for this directed reading I did with Campbell over the summer. I looked a little bit at the managerial revolution, with like the rise of a managerial elite, and it's a very new topic to me. But one of the things that came out of it was in America, particularly with, I think, deindustrialization, there was an emergence. Not that I'm like a classist or anything, but the argument, as far as I could tell, with the managerial elite is that the upper and lower classes in America have separated more deeply over globalization, because the upper classes who are wealthy and the owners are going to be more cosmopolitan because of the globalization with the market, and the lower classes not so much, because they're more tied to the physical place, like the service industries, farmers, things like that, manufacturers. They're more tied to a place. So there's a class tension there, and I can kind of see that reflected in, Hamiltonians, I think, because they're internationalists, would be more, if you're buying into managerial elite theory, it would be predisposed to be more elite. And the Jacksonians is obviously more grassroots and populist. So in that respect, I think they'd be at odds. But you have an event like Pearl Harbor or 9/11, the two will come together.
Well, that's actually really interesting too, because it might be the case that when you have a more industrial manufacturing economy, there's less to divide the Jacksonians and Hamiltonians.
Yeah.
Did Mead talk about, is like Wilsonianism, is that something that's always been present in American foreign policy, or was it something that's new after Wilson? Or did it take like Wilson to articulate it, but it was kind of always there?
Yeah, that was a question I had too, because you'd said earlier that they were all present in the founding in one way or another.
Yeah,
that was just me being off the cuff. Me misspeaking. I think what he's getting at is that they're all uniquely American, and my impression is that Wilsonianism does not emerge as a player that is on par with the rest of those schools until Wilson.
Yeah.
And something that's interesting, I recall, is that Wilsonianism is actually more grassroots than we would think, because he makes a big deal about, you said in the Christian element, but especially the missionaries in particular, and this notion that like so much of American diplomacy has actually been accomplished through, like it's either accomplished through, or the first contacts are made by missionaries, and that has often been completely organic and outside of the control of statesmen. It's just now we have something to do in this country, and it turns out we've already had missionaries there for 30 years. So that's an interesting kind of element to it. But
and I do wonder if you could make the argument that Wilsonianism in the 19th century was exhibited in the sort of expansion westward, because it kind of seems like Hamiltonians maybe are fine with that westward expansion, but it doesn't seem like the Jeffersonians or Jacksonians would really be as on board with that. But it does seem something that's like, oh, we're spreading sort of a civilization westward that seems almost Wilsonian. But maybe I'm wrong on that. I could be completely wrong.
Well, I think you're right that there's something about, like, I don't know, this notion of like well, actually, we might say, I'm sorry, this came to me as I was saying this, but like you probably see something like Wilsonianism in if you look at the language of the Mayflower Compact. It speaks explicitly about spreading Christianity and converting the natives. So that might be a very Wilsonian element. And I think there were pretty significant elements, if I'm not just spitballing historically here, to convert natives and things like that. But I would think you could find correspondence to Hamiltonian, like, mercantile interests going outward. And then even though it does tend to be associated more so like global, like sea power, things like that. And the Jacksonians, I think, like the filibusters and things, we might associate like just, I don't know, the men who went out to go fight the Comanche and you know what I mean? Like things like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
I would almost think that, westward expansion has somewhat of a Jeffersonian, maybe indirectly, because I'm thinking of Washington's farewell address does have some emphasis on, I think he says 30 years. It's like 20 or 30 years, but there's a line in it that says, like, we need 20 to 30 years to build ourselves up and expand, and become a more secure power. And like, we cannot afford foreign entanglements during this period of growth. And then we can begin to evolve ourselves somewhat, but we need this breathing space. And I think implicit in that is westward expansion to an extent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, cool. Unless there's anything else, we can transition to mine.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
All right, let me stop sharing my screen. There we go. All right.
Let's see, and I'm going to start with Fearon. Can y'all see that okay?
Yeah.
Cool. So this one is rational explanations for war. I think, if I remember correctly, Dr. Jordan once said that this piece changed his life. It is just a journal article. So I'd recommend reading it, or at least going over the introduction and the main points on it, because I would expect this to make an appearance in some way on the cons if Dr. Jordan's writing a question.
Yeah.
So the one sentence summary is: states go to war, but they really shouldn't. And so what are the circumstances in which rational states may choose rationally to go to war? So kind of he's responding to some of the to some of the then contemporary literature coming out, especially in the game theory world, that says there's no real reason that states should go to war, because if you're trying to divide something, you should just divide it. And even if it's not divided 50-50, you can look at the relative power between two states. Like, the two states can look at their relative power and divide it along that divide. So like, say state A is 60% of the relative power, state B is 40% of the relative power. They have a disagreement, and they should then decide, okay, state A takes 60% of the disagreement, state B takes 40%. And if states are rational, they should never go to war, because war is costly. And if states A and B go to war, maybe it costs 20% of their relative power each. And that's less. They get way less by going to war than they would just coming to an agreement. So he says that's kind of the prevailing literature in rational theories of war. But he says actually rational states can rationally choose to go to war because of three main issues, and that's private information. He puts private information and incentives to represent under the same. Number two is commitment problems, and three is issue indivisibilities. So kind of talked already about the puzzle. So there's no real reason why states don't make an agreement to avoid war. He says that there's three reasons that people typically make. So there's the IR theorists who say that anarchy is why states go to war. And he says, sure, that may describe why states are able to go to war, but it doesn't describe why they still don't just make agreements. He says, second are those who say that preventative war, to which those who say war happens as a preventative thing, so rising power of Athens, fear brought in Sparta type argument. That's the preventative war ones. But he says that also doesn't describe why states just don't make agreements, why rising power doesn't agree with the status quo power. And then the third is positive expected utility. So what that means is maybe one state can get 100% of the disagreement if they win the war versus maybe risking splitting it up. But he says that doesn't explain why states would take that gamble versus just coming to an agreement to split the issue, however, the relative power. So he says that there's those three pieces. So we'll start with the private information one and incentives to misrepresent. So private information is often states will know the capabilities of themselves pretty well, but because of maybe or because of a whole host of reasons, they might not know their opponent's information. So a leader of State A may know that his people are very, strong, have a lot of morale, and are ready to fight, but he doesn't know if State B's people are the same way. Um, this can lead to a miscalculation in the relative power. So State A may think that they have all of the power, or the preponderance of power, but State B might think, oh, we're actually better fighters than State A, so they may have more tanks, but we can fight better than their soldiers can fight. So actually, we're the most powerful. And what that turns into, he goes into this sort of game theory type approach where he shows that if both states A and State B think they have 70% of the relative power, what that actually means is that there's no way for them to split it. There's no way for them to actually come to an agreement on how to split the issue, because if you think you have 70% of the relative power, then you're going to want 70% of the issue. And if both sides want 70% of the issue, then there's no way to actually settle that. The other way is through incentives to misrepresent. So in this one, you're essentially lying to your opponent. And the purpose for this, he says, is to make yourself seem more powerful than you actually are. If you make yourself seem weak, or if you are weak, then you're going to get the thing taken away from you if you come to an agreement. But if you seem way stronger, then maybe you can get more of that piece. So that also increases the chance that there's a miscalculation. So that's way one. Way two is commitment problems. So on this one, he essentially says that there's no way in international relations to force someone to abide by an agreement unless you defeat their military. Because when you defeat their military, then you can have control over their state, because then there's no way for them to really stop you. So you can enforce the agreement that you come to after the war ends. And this is kind of actually where I think there's maybe some where he talks about like the issues of preventative war. He's like, oh, that doesn't explain why states make agreements either. But then commitment problems is the same argument that those who are preventative war people argue. So I don't really see like how that difference is there. But nonetheless, he says that those commitment problems may encourage states to destroy their opponent's military so that they can enforce those demands and make sure that their opponent abides by the commitment. And then the third one, so commitment problems also has issues with appeasement. So you don't want to appease your enemy because that might just make them stronger, and then they'll come back later and ask for more and more and more. And then the third one's issue indivisibilities. I don't have it on the in-depth summary because I thought it was fairly, evident there. I can add it, but essentially it's like the thing that you're trying to split can't be split. So there's no way to make an agreement that matches the relative power. So an example of this is like, the Nazis, wanted to kill all of the Slavs. So you can't have an agreement where the Nazis kill 70% of the Slavs and Russia's okay with that, or the Soviet Union's okay with that. It's like a all or nothing type thing. So war has to result from that. Confidence level of 8 on that. I feel pretty good about it. I think Stephen and I have read it a few times, but I think it is an excellent piece.
Mm-hmm.
Any questions on it?
I thought that was great. I forgot about this. I definitely read this TPSing for causes of war. But yeah, I don't know. It didn't change my life, but I think it's a fantastic piece.
I think it is the most cited piece in international relations.
Oh, really?
Sure. Yeah.
Wow.
I think it got an R&R when it got submitted. If I remember from Jordan's story, that it like got revised and resubmitted, or it got rejected the first time.
I think it
Fearon
got
submitted
rejected
it.
the first time. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's great and it's fairly short.
Mhm.
So, especially because Dr. Jordan loves it so much and he's probably
Yeah.
writing a question,
Yeah.
I'd really recommend that one.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Jordan will definitely mention this and Schelling.
Yeah.
hmm
Yeah.
So,
Well, cool. I'll go into the other one then. No. Okay. So this is Dr. Campbell's favorite. And this one, I've read all of On War before. I did not read all of On War for this this bit here. So, one sentence summary, it's Clausewitz, right? Like, I mean, the best explanation for war, taking it from it. So I think that's my opinion. I think it's the best explanation for war, taking it from its abstract and adding all of the various complications that bring it from something that's abstract into something that's actually recognizable. So the thesis is that war in the abstract tends towards absolute violence. However, there's these political, social, and leadership factors, and that's the Clausewitzian trinity that Dr. Campbell loves, all serve to limit war in some way. Broad questions: what is war? What limit war? And how does genius, military genius, and political genius impact the ways that wars are fought? So book one is, at the most abstract is how he begins, and this is where he starts providing all of the various definitions for war. But the one that I think we really need to remember is that war is active politics, is politics by other means, or as Dr. Campbell likes to translate it, war is the admixture of politics by other means, war is politics with the admixture of other means, is how he puts it. So I think what's important with this, though, and the Parrott translation, which is what we all use, I think does a bad kind of job of translating that, because it makes it seem like it's I think the Parrott translation says that war is an active policy, which implies for us that it's something that's like a deliberate action to achieve a deliberate goal, as like policy is supposed to be. But the actual German translation goes in, it says it's Politik, which can be translated as policy, but it can also be translated as politics, or political. So I think we should look at like war as something that is political, but not as something that is strictly a policy decision. So in the same way that politics can incite a passion in a way that policy, I think, can't really, war incites a passion in people. So that's on the nature of war. Then that's book one. Book two is on the theory of war. So there's kind of two activities of war. There's the preparation for war and the carrying out of war. And the theory of war itself is how the tools you have are used in a way to achieve victory. Then he gets into the tactical versus the strategic level. So the tactical level is the individual engagements, and though tactical, that's the realm of tactics. Individual engagement is a round of fire between two adversaries. So think of an engagement as, I get shot at, I shoot back, the enemy runs away, or the enemy gets shot and dies. That would be one engagement. And so the tactical level is how do you deal with these individual engagements. The strategic level is how the various forms of these engagements are used within the wider context of the war, and especially the context of the war as that political act. So it's kind of harnessing those individual engagements to achieve that political goal. He doesn't at this point have what we think of as the operational level today. which is that level between tactics and strategy. So if you think of like, in video game world, right, tactics is like Call of Duty. That's that individual engagement. You have the operational. That's like the Age of Empires, video game. And then strategies like Hearts of Iron. Then there's these influences that you can analyze in order to analyze your own, in order to have an analysis of wars. There's these ways that these intellectual efforts that you can make, Clausewitz says, which is discovering and interpretation of facts, tracing effects to their causes, and the investigation and evaluation of the means. And that's how you analyze a war. So that's kind of how he looks at book 2. And then book 3 is on strategy in general. So the great strategists are those who best employ the means of their army available to achieve the planned result of the war, the strategic goal. So he says strategy used to be decided in the capital of the nation, but it's now in the field with decision makers close. Good strategists discover that harmony in actions. So that's what he means by that is that there's the action should all kind of meld together in a way that achieves, at that small level, they should meld together in a way that achieves that big goal. So it seems simple, but it's difficult. And then he says that strategy or genius can be developed in people by a result of practice and by a result of study. And what that means, he kind of says, some people think that military genius is just something that someone is born with. But what that actually does when you think that is it hides all of the practice and discipline that these geniuses have put forth in order to be good strategists. And then he concludes this one with a good strategist will consider the moral, and by that he means like morale, not like the goodness of someone, but the morale of the people, physical, mathematical, geographical, and statistical. So if he considers all of those things, then and aligns them with the goals, then he's going to be a great strategist. But I think probably if you could only read one book, I'd read book 1. And that's the one we can kind of focus on if we want in the discussion. I think after book 3, it gets into like particulars, which I think's fun, but there's like a whole section on like a whole book on fighting in swamps. Like, I don't know if that's going to be a comps question. If it is, it's going to be a horrible comps question. That'd be so mean. Describe how Clausewitz's defense on the ideal level works. Like, no, I don't think it's going to get there. I'd focus on that first book.
I think that's right. And I think this was good. The only thing I can think of from the later books that I know Campbell likes to hammer on, which is probably good, is I might be totally off base. I would bet it's book 7, but I have no idea. I don't even remember how many books there are. But there's a point where he says that the general must also be a statesman or something like that, and he talks about civil military relations. Yeah, that's probably like one big thing to pull out of the later ones.
Yeah. He also, I think it comes up in Causes of War, but I mean, it might be important to note that Clausewitz is, I think, the first who is predicting the rise of guerrilla warfare and the idea of the nation in arms. Like, he has this beautiful analogy. I think it's book 6, chapter 26 or something like that. Whoa. But it's a chapter called The People in Arms. I only know it because I read it a couple months ago, so I'm no genius. But
he talks on page 560.
Yeah.
But where he talks about an invading force into a country which faces the people itself are kind of like this mist that develops, and the mist darkens and a thunderbolt emerges out of it. But then when the enemy attacks, it the mist dissipates and then recoalesces elsewhere.
Yeah.
But Campbell and I think he might include that in Pauses of War. I don't know.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that I thought of was the way that Dr. Jordan describes genius is that at bottom, it's the ability to rapidly recognize patterns. And that both comes from just sort of like raw brain horsepower, but it also comes from a knowledge of history, of knowing like, oh, my current situation is like this historical situation, so I should try to act in a similar way.
Yeah.
To whatever general successfully got himself out of that situation or what have you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is important too to note that like Clausewitz is writing this shortly after the Napoleonic Wars.
Yeah.
And so he's looking at what I think what a lot of people are writing, that it's like a new, even at this time, that it's a new type of warfare. And so he's responding a lot to those, those critiques and what he's seen, because he was in those wars.
Yeah, because a big thrust of it is the levée en masse has changed warfare, and if states are going to survive in this new type of war, they have to adapt or they won't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you guys recall? I'm just seeing Campbell's pretty on the ball, so unlike other professors, he's very good about deleting his previous courses from Canvas. So I was trying to go back and see, but I know that there is like, I know there are two like specific articles that he assigned in my development of strategic thought class I took with him that make this argument you're talking about, like that it's been a bad translation of politics, and then one of them has a lot on the Trinity.
Yeah.
Do you know what articles those are?
I don't know. I don't remember. I know that the one who really pushes that it is like policy, using that translation is is it Stephen Biddle's book, talking about like why we fight or something like that.
Yeah, that title is familiar.
Yeah,
I think that's right.
Yeah, and then there's some responses to that book that go into so I'm sure it's one of those. But
what was the second one? Biddle and what else?
Hold on, I've got it on my bookshelf. I'll be right back.
Okay, I'm pulling up my term paper for that class to see if I cited it.
Yeah, he's teaching strategic thought right now, and I don't think that came up. I think he just changed the syllabus. So.
Because I know a big thing for him was like that Clausewitz is not seen as relevant anymore.
Right.
And Hugh Strachan, The Case for Reading Clausewitz on War Today.
Okay.
I think that's one.
Strawn. It's
maybe
like it's spelled
with the CH. Yeah.
Strawn. Yeah. No, he's I'll look on my syllabus. We read a couple things by him earlier this semester.
This is part of an edited volume, I think.
Yeah, let me see.
I have
he likes Strawn
from the Direction of War. I'm gonna send this in the chat.
Yeah.
I hope that this was some. Yeah, so he does like Strawn. I'm not presenting something he like assigned and didn't like.
Yeah, what do we read by Strawn?
So the bad translation is Howard and Perret.
Yes, but that's the main translation everyone uses.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what can you do? And I think it's John Keegan's History of Warfare, which I think is mirrored in y'all's. But in this, he says like, Clausewitz did seem to perceive politics as an autonomous activity, the meeting place of rational forms and emotional forces in which reason and feeling are the determinants, but in which culture plays no determining role. And I think that's because that's based on that that's based on that mistranslation of policy, since policy kind of is, I think, fairly divorced from politics. But politics is very cultural, and I don't think Clausewitz would argue that war is divorced from culture in any way.
Yeah. We did read that article by Strawn pretty early on in the semester, so he's still. I think it might be good to have it as a refresher.
Yeah, because that's a big one. That's coming after Powell, because Powell was always talking about the Trinity and Clausewitz, and he's like, Powell doesn't understand this. And I remember Campbell making a big thing about like how like Catholics understand it better because people tend to think of it as three separate things when really it's three things in one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. But so can you, is it in the memo or can you just refresh for me though? You said, so the normal definition is policy by other means. The better translation is politics by other means. And then Campbell says something.
It's politics with the admixture of other means, which is not the German translation, but
that's how he likes to think of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who came up with the translation that it's the continuation of politics by other means? So I've heard that one before too.
I think
is that in Perret?
That's probably just how Perret says it, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Which I guess I should go grab my copy of On War, because I think I remember what chapters it's even.
Yeah, this is really helpful.
Well, I don't see it, which is embarrassing. Don't tell anyone. It's probably in a bag somewhere. But I've been using there's the full Parrot translations online.
So yeah, I think you can get, because it's a Princeton Press book, you can just get it on JSTOR.
Yeah. There's also on antilogicalism.com has the whole thing. Let's see. But that is where he, chapter 2, military genius. See, I'm looking through it now, which is not, it's going to be an exciting little video for us all. Yeah, so book 1, this is page 88, or sorry, 87. He goes, war is merely the continuation of policy by other means.
Yeah.
And then, but then it's funny because then the first sentence is like, that war is not merely an act of policy, but a true political instrument, the continuation of political intercourse, which I think is, correct, and that's how you should think of politique in this one. But that's not how people have interpreted it. Yeah, it seems like a very basic issue that I never really understood why people don't.
I mean, considering that the word political is in the very next sentence.
Yeah.
Context clues.
Well, yeah, and I wonder too, I mean, just because people tend to broadly use the word politics even in a different way than, say, people in our department would. I think taking it broader to encompass a lot of elements of... a lot of people wouldn't use the term political life, they would think of politics in terms of electoral things, and I don't know. Yeah.
Let's see, so I'm looking up the German just so I go crazy.
Does Clausewitz define politics?
Let's see. I don't actually remember if he goes politics is at any point.
I think the closest he might come to it is by defining politics in terms of the Trinity as just one of the restraining forces on war,
Yeah.
and that it's the domain of the statesman. I think that's as far as I know, that's as far as he goes in defining it. But it's only in relation to its position on the continuum.
Yeah. Yeah. So in German, it's something along the lines of war is like simply a continuation of politics with other means. Yeah. So I don't know if y'all taken German, but I can pop up that section for you if you want. It's like this section right there. But they translate that politique as policy. Yeah, and then this first line, it's like, so we can see that war is not simply a political act, but instead a political instrument that has a continuation of political interactions and so forth.
It reminds me when I read your prospectus, you've got that one angry footnote in there about this.
Oh, yeah.
It's like 4 lines. He's like, I don't like this.
Yeah.
I laughed at that.
Yeah.
Is your prospectus done?
Yeah.
Have you defended?
No, I don't think we can technically defend it until we've taken comps.
Yeah.
But I'm planning on defending it like in August.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I already had my committee and they already like my topic, so there's no real reason to wait on it. And
that's
where I'm at. I just need to get the thing together.
Yeah.
Which is
me too.
The most arduous element.
Yeah.
I have so much source material from because Campbell was like tutoring me in how to like adopt his philosophy of writing, and he basically like does preliminary notes of the pieces that he reads, and he just has huge documents of just like either edits or like just thoughts that he has, and then he takes that and lets it get to like 40-50 pages long, and then translates that into prose that's much more concise and shorter. So he's like, he starts huge and works down. So I've just got tons and tons of source material because I've been writing I must have written like a dozen 5-page papers for him this semester. So I have to like turn that into a prospectus in like the next 3 weeks. So
yeah, nice. Well, do we have anything else on all Clausewitz?